In a quiet fishing town off the coast of Maine, a young woman named Isabel Moore began an old boat restoration with her last $1,000, a rotting hull, peeling paint, and memories no one remembered. No sponsors, no crew, just one determined mechanic and a dream. But what happened next? A war veteran appeared with a story tied to the boat's past and a secret that had been waiting half a century to resurface. This powerful journey of old boat restoration, lost legacy, and a life-changing act of kindness will move you in ways you didn't expect. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. Some folks spend their last $1,000 on rent or groceries or just hoping to survive another month. But not Isabel Moore. She spent hers on a boat or what was left of one. A sun-bleached hull, rotting wood, and rusted nails barely holding it together. The kind of thing most people would leave behind to sink into the weeds. But not Isabel. At 29, Isabel had grease under her nails, calluses on her hands, and the kind of stubborn heart that doesn't give up even when it probably should. She lived in the quiet town of Stonington, Maine, where people waved from porches, and boats meant more than just fishing. They carried stories, history, ghosts. She found the wrecked boat tucked behind an abandoned shed near the dockyard. Nobody claimed it. Nobody wanted it. But something about its shape, its scars, spoke to her like it had once mattered. And maybe, just maybe, it could matter again. She didn't know where this journey would take her. All she knew was this wasn't just about wood and water. It was about healing, about purpose, and what was waiting inside that boat would change everything. Isabel Moore worked alone, most evenings, lit by a flickering work light and the distant hush of waves brushing the rocks at Stonington, Maine. She patched the boat's hull using reclaimed cedar from an old shed. Every bolt she replaced felt like setting a broken bone. Every stroke of paint was an attempt to cover years of silence. Locals thought she was wasting her time. Even her landlord, Mrs. Garvey, shook her head when Isabel mentioned her plan. "Sweetheart," the older woman sighed, "boats like that have been dead longer than you've been alive." But Isabel kept at it. Not because she believed in magic, but because she believed in finishing things that others walked away from, maybe because she had been walked away from herself more times than she could count. Then, on the 12th evening, just as she was sanding down the edges of the bow, a voice startled her from behind. "You know," the man said, "she wasn't always that broken." Isabel turned quickly, lowering her sander. A man in his late 70s stood there, shoulders stiff under a military green jacket. His boots were worn. His voice had the rasp of someone who'd smoked too long, or seen too much, or maybe both. "I'm sorry," she asked, cautious. He nodded toward the boat. "That one the Halcyon? We used to call her Hal. She carried men across the channel in 1971. Vietnam. She wasn't meant for glory. She was meant to bring 'em home." Isabel blinked. "You knew this boat?" He stepped closer, gently dragging a hand across the gunwale like greeting an old friend. "Knew her. She saved my life." She didn't speak. She just let the air settle. The man finally turned toward her, eyes clouded but sharp beneath the weight of memory. "I'm Hank Weston, Chief Petty Officer, retired. I haven't seen this girl since the day they told me our unit was being disbanded. We left Hal behind, tied up at a river dock near Da Nang. Never thought I'd see her again." Isabel's chest tightened. All this time, she thought the boat had no name, no past, just decay. But here was a man telling her this weathered hull had lived. Hank reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, yellowed with time. He handed it to her without a word. In the photo, 5 young men in uniform stood around the boat, all grinning, sunburned, arms slung over each other's shoulders like brothers. One of them, a tall, lanky man with a wide smile, had Weston stitched above his heart. Isabel looked from the photo to the boat, then back to Hank. "I've been restoring her," she whispered, voice cracking slightly. "I didn't know." "You're giving her a second life," Hank said quietly. "And maybe giving the rest of us something back, too." They stood there in silence, just the two of them and Hal surrounded by wind, salt, and memory. That night, Isabel didn't go home right away. She sat inside the boat for the first time, ran her hand along the inner beam where the wood still bore a faint, hand-carved name for Charlie. She didn't know who Charlie was. Not yet. But now, she wanted to find out. The next morning, Isabel returned to the marina before sunrise. The mist clung low across the bay, wrapping the Halcyon in a soft veil of fog, as if time itself wanted to keep her hidden just a little longer. She hadn't expected to see Hank again. But there he was seated on an old crate beside the dock, holding 2 steaming coffees. "Didn't want to spook you," he said with a half-smile, offering her one. "Figured you'd come back." They worked side by side for the next few days. Hank didn't say much, not about the war, not about the men in the photo, not even about Charlie. But Isabel could feel it. The weight he carried wasn't just from age. It was anchored deep in memory. On the 4th day, as she replaced the last section of rotted floorboards, her crowbar caught something wedged tightly beneath a rib of the hull. At first, she thought it was just more debris until the metal glint stopped her cold. It was a tin box, rusted shut, heavy. She glanced at Hank, who stood frozen the moment he saw it. With careful hands, she pried it open. Inside were 2 things: a folded letter, sealed in wax and stained with time, a silver dog tag, dull but still legible, Charlie Keaton. Hank sat down hard on the edge of the dock. "I thought they took everything," he whispered. "Charlie was our medic, quiet, kind. He didn't come back." Isabel didn't say anything. She passed the letter to him. His hands shook as he broke the wax seal. The edges cracked like dry leaves. He read silently for a moment, then stopped, swallowing hard. "It's addressed to me," he finally said. Her breath caught. "Do you want to be alone?" But Hank shook his head. "No." He wanted someone to know. His voice broke as he read. "Hank, if you find this, then somehow you made it. And I'm glad. This boat saved us more times than I can count. If I don't make it out, I want someone to fix her up, not because she's beautiful, but because she deserves it, like all of us. I left my tag so she remembers me too, and I hope someday someone like you will bring her back to life. Give her purpose again. You always said boats don't forget. Let's see if you were right." Silence. The wind shifted. Isabel looked at the letter, then the boat, then Hank. His face was a map of grief and gratitude all at once. "He never told anyone," Hank whispered. "He knew we were getting pulled out. I thought I lost him without saying goodbye. And all this time, he was waiting here," Isabel said softly, "in this boat." They sat there until the sun dipped behind the hills, golden light catching the edge of the boat's name. Halcyon, now freshly painted. Shimmering. That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. The boat wasn't just a project anymore. It was a monument, a memory. And now, she had a mission. She wasn't just restoring wood and nails. She was restoring a promise. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. The boat no longer felt like Isabel's project. It felt like something much bigger. A vessel not just of wood and steel, but of memory, grief, and unspoken promises. And with Hank by her side, every hour spent sanding, tightening, and repainting took on deeper meaning. Locals started noticing. A few would slow their cars driving past the dock. Others would wander down with questions. Isabel expected them to mock her, they always had before. But this time, they stayed and listened, because Hank had begun to speak. He told stories in that gravel-thick voice, stories he hadn't shared in 50 years, about narrow escapes, quiet heroism, and laughter in the dark, about Charlie, too. How he once gave away his own rations to feed a child in a Vietnamese village. How he volunteered for every dangerous run. How he never once raised his voice. He was the best of us, Hank would say. And we left him behind. That guilt had followed Hank home. Through marriage, fatherhood, retirement. It had slept in the back of his mind, quiet and heavy. But something about seeing Halcyon come back to life had cracked the seal. He was letting go, story by story. And Isabel. She had changed, too. For years, she'd felt like a ghost in her own town, the mechanic girl with grease on her hands, invisible in a place where everyone knew your grandfather's name. She didn't come from a legacy of war heroes or old money. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 16. Since then, it had been her and the shop, keeping old engines alive. But now, people saw her, not just for the work she did, but for the why. They saw the young woman breathing life into something the world had forgotten and honoring the men tied to it. One evening, as she scrubbed the last layer of grime off the engine casing, Isabel paused. Her reflection looked back at her in the metal, tired, smudged, but proud. And for the first time in a long time, she whispered, "Maybe I'm not just fixing a boat. Maybe I'm fixing something in me, too." She didn't know if it was the boat, or Charlie's letter, or Hank's stories that had changed her. Maybe it was all of it. Because restoration isn't just about what you're fixing, it's about who you become in the process. And as the Halcyon began to take shape, fresh paint, gleaming rails, even her old name lovingly carved and repainted in bold white letters, something else emerged from the woodwork. Hope. That same week, Isabel found a waterlogged satchel buried under a false floorboard clearly missed during the initial teardown. Inside was another surprise, a weathered, leather-bound notebook. The front read, "Property of C. Keaton, Field Notes, 1970-71. It wasn't a journal. It was a record, coordinates, repair logs, names of injured soldiers treated, dates of river missions. But on the very last page, written in shaky pen, one line stood alone. "If you're reading this, the boat made it. So did the story. Thank you." Isabel stared at those words for a long time, her hands trembling. She turned to Hank, who had just come around the corner with a thermos of coffee. "You were right," she said, holding the notebook up. "Boats don't forget." Hank smiled, a single tear sliding down his cheek. Neither do the people they carry. The restored Halcyon wasn't perfect, not by any shipbuilder's standards. But every imperfection, every uneven plank or hand-sanded edge carried something more valuable than polish purpose. By early summer, Isabel and Hank stood together on the dock, watching as Halcyon floated for the first time in decades. The bay was quiet, its surface like glass. Hank's hands were shaking not from age, but from awe. "She floats," he said, as if disbelieving his own words. Isabel grinned, blinking back tears. "She's ready." But what happened next? Isabel could never have expected. The morning after Halcyon touched water, a letter arrived at Isabel's garage, not by post, but hand-delivered in a manila envelope, slipped under the door. The return address simply read, Department of Veteran Affairs. Inside was a short typed note and a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle, dated 1972. The clipping featured a blurry photo of the Halcyon afloat, battered, and full of soldiers with the caption, Last river crew pulls out, mobile field unit disbanded. But it was the note that stopped her heart. Ms. Moore, we were contacted by Mr. Hank Weston regarding your restoration of the Halcyon. We believe your work may qualify the vessel for historical preservation under the War Memorial Vessel Program. We would like to request a formal inspection and, pending confirmation, the Halcyon may be approved for public display at the State Veterans Memorial Dock. Sincerely, U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. Isabel dropped to a seat on the nearest stool, the letter trembling in her hands. All she'd wanted was to save the boat, but now the world might remember it. That evening, Hank came to the garage as usual, thermos in hand, grease on his sleeves, but when Isabel handed him the letter, his expression went still. His voice cracked after reading it. This isn't about me, he whispered. This is about all the ones we left behind. For the next few days, they worked with a renewed sense of urgency. Isabel cleaned every inch of the interior. Hank polished the brass fixtures until they shone like medals. They didn't just want Halcyon to be seen. They wanted her story to be heard. And stories started coming back. After a local paper published a piece titled Mechanic Revives Vietnam-Era Boat with Hero's Legacy, something incredible happened. Letters began arriving. Dozens, then hundreds. One man wrote, My father served on a boat named Halcyon. He never spoke about the war, but he kept a photo of that boat in his drawer until the day he died. Thank you for bringing her back. Another read, Charlie Keaton saved my uncle's life. We never knew what happened to him. Now we do. One woman sent a hand-drawn sketch of the boat. With a note, I was the nurse who treated that crew when they returned. I remember Charlie's face. Quiet, but kind. Each letter added a new layer to the story, not just of Charlie, or Hank, or even Isabel, but of a whole generation that had long been forgotten. One evening, Isabel sat aboard the Halcyon alone. The sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky with gold and crimson. She ran her hand over the railing, smooth now under her fingertips. I didn't save you, she whispered to the boat. You saved me. Because this boat, this forgotten relic, had given her something she hadn't known she was missing. Connection, legacy, and most of all, a reason to keep going. She stood up, took a deep breath, and reached for her notebook, the same one she used to sketch engine parts and write down fuel ratios. But this time, she wrote something different. At the top of the page, in bold letters, Halcyon Project Outreach Plan, Phase 1. Below that, she scribbled, Invite schools for history tours. Host veterans for storytelling nights. Mobile repair clinic for families of veterans. Charlie Keaton Scholarship Fund. Mechanics and Veterans Kids. It was no longer just about restoring a boat. It was about restoring a community. And Halcyon was just the beginning. 3 days before the official inspection from the Department of Veteran Affairs, Isabel received a phone call that would test everything she'd built and everything she thought she was strong enough to carry. It was from Hank's daughter. Her voice cracked on the line. Miss Moore, my dad collapsed at the dock this morning. They've taken him to St. Joseph's. It doesn't look good. Isabel dropped the wrench in her hand. It hit the floor with a heavy clang, but she didn't hear it. She was already running. When she arrived at the hospital, Hank lay unconscious in a small, sterile room. Tubes ran from his arm. The heart monitor beeped slow and steady but weak. The nurse told her it was his heart. He's stable now, but he needs rest. But Isabel knew better. Hank's heart had been carrying more than blood. It had carried 50 years of guilt, pain, and stories no one had ever let him tell. Until now. She sat beside him, holding the photograph he'd given her. The one with the 5 boys around the boat. Charlie's dog tag rested in her other palm. She whispered softly, "She's in the water now. Hank, and the world's listening. But I still need you to tell the last chapter." She stayed until midnight. Before she left, she placed Charlie's tag on the bedside table. "In case you see him," she said, "tell him thanks for trusting me." Back at the marina, Isabel worked like someone possessed. She slept 2 hours a night. She missed meals. She polished the brass railings until her hands bled. Not out of fear that the boat would fail the inspection, but because it had to be perfect. She was no longer fixing something broken. She was honoring a life. The morning of the inspection came. A team of 3 from the VA arrived, 2 in suits, 1 a retired Navy officer. They walked the deck slowly, quietly. They asked questions, took notes, touched the nameplate. Then the officer turned to her. "You did all this?" She nodded. "With what team?" She hesitated. "Just me. And a friend." He looked back at the Halcyon, then at her oil-stained shirt, bruised knuckles, and sleep-starved eyes. "Well," he said, "your friend picked the right person." Before they left, the officer leaned in. "There's one more thing. Hank Weston called us 2 weeks ago, left a voicemail. Said if anything happened before inspection day, we'd better show up because the girl working on this boat was going to make history." Isabel turned away, her throat clenched too tight to speak. That evening, just as the last rays of sun caught the Halcyon's freshly painted hull, a car pulled into the gravel lot. Isabel looked up, unsure. The door opened, and Hank stepped out. Slower than before, paler, but smiling. She ran to him, not with panic, but relief. His daughter followed, giving her a quiet nod of gratitude. Hank walked down the dock, his steps careful, and placed one trembling hand on the boat. "She looks good," he said. Charlie would be proud. They didn't talk much that night. They didn't have to. They just sat on the edge of the dock, the young mechanic and the old sailor watching the boat they'd built together sway gently under the stars. Finally, Hank spoke. "I think I can go now," he said softly. Isabel turned sharply. "Go. Not like that." He chuckled. "I mean, I can finally rest. The stories are out. The memories are home. You've done what none of us could do." "Isabel." Tears stung her eyes. "No," she whispered. "We did." He looked at her. "No, sweetheart. You gave this boat back her soul. And maybe you gave me back mine." The day of the Halcyon's official dedication ceremony arrived with a golden sunrise and the smell of salt in the breeze. The town of Stonington, Maine, once sleepy and quiet, now buzzed with life. Families, veterans, students, and reporters crowded the marina. A color guard stood at attention. Folding chairs lined the dock. A podium stood at the bow of the boat, a boat once left for dead, now shining like a medal. Isabel didn't recognize half the faces. Some had traveled across states. Some carried old photos. Others carried folded flags. And Hank Weston, dressed in his navy blues, stood at the center of it, all hands shaking, eyes full. He'd insisted Isabel give the speech. But she didn't want to. "This isn't my story," she told him. He looked at her, hand on her shoulder. "It became yours the moment you picked up that first plank." So, when her name was called, Isabel stepped to the podium. The microphone squeaked slightly. She cleared her throat, holding back the lump rising. She began. When I bought this boat, I thought I was fixing something broken. I thought maybe saving her would make me feel less lost myself. But I didn't save her. She saved me. This boat, the Halcyon, carried men through a war. She carried stories most of us never got to hear. And one of those stories was about a man named Charlie Keaton, a medic who gave everything, including his name, to make sure others came home. Thanks to Hank, and thanks to Charlie, this boat didn't disappear. She became a voice, a lesson, a reminder that sometimes the past finds its way back, not to haunt us, but to heal us. I spent my last $1,000 on this boat because I thought she mattered. And now, I know she does. Because every time someone steps on this deck, they're stepping into a story worth remembering. When she finished, there was silence. Then applause, slow at first. Then rising. But what mattered more to Isabel was seeing Hank standing, hand to his heart, tears streaking his weathered cheeks. The VA officer stepped up, presented the official plaque for the Halcyon's historical preservation, and declared it a living memorial to Vietnam veterans and those who never came home. They unveiled a bronze plate affixed to the side of the boat. It read, "Restored by Isabel Moore, dedicated in memory of Charles Keaton and the Halcyon crew." Isabel stepped back, overwhelmed, but just then a small boy tugged on her sleeve. He couldn't have been more than 8. "Miss," he asked shyly, "are you the girl who fixed the hero boat?" Isabel knelt down. "I guess I am." His eyes sparkled. "When I grow up, I want to fix stuff too." She smiled, blinking fast to stop herself from crying again. "You can. Kiddo, just start with what's broken, and don't stop." That night, the dock quieted. Most people had gone home. Only Hank remained, seated on the deck of the Halcyon, watching the stars. Isabel sat beside him. "She's yours now," he said softly. "This boat, this legacy. You know that, right?" She nodded. "But I won't keep her to myself." "What'll you do?" "I want kids to come learn here, veterans to share their stories. Maybe even start a program to teach mechanics to kids like I was the ones nobody sees." Hank chuckled. Then Charlie really did pick the right person. They sat in silence again, comforted by the lapping water, the creak of wood, the soft hum of memory. Then, almost as if the boat itself had spoken, Isabel whispered, "For every broken thing that still deserves a second chance, we keep building." And under the star-lit sky, the Halcyon floated not as a boat, but as a beacon. Isabel Moore thought she was just patching up a broken hull with her last $1,000. She never expected to uncover a forgotten war story, or to help a veteran find peace after decades of silence. But life has a way of placing broken things and broken people in our path for a reason. This story teaches us that even the smallest acts, sanding a plank, listening to an old man's story, honoring a name etched on a dog tag, can become echoes of something far greater. Healing doesn't always come through grand gestures. Sometimes it comes with a wrench, a letter, and a heart that refuses to quit. Because legacy isn't left behind. It's passed on person to person, hand to hand, story to soul. Because for Isabel and for those who believe in second chances, restoration isn't the end. It's only the beginning. The end, up next, 2 more powerful stories waiting for you. Click to keep sailing with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered.